So, guys, I want to do another video for my Black Fatigue series, and some things I want to do is like talk about some of my own behavior because I do think it's also kind of critical to always judge myself because I've definitely acted in some thug stereotypes when I was younger, but also too I've been like a house nigger and other types of things, and I do want to talk about sucking up to white people, and that's something that I've been really guilty of, and I just know how that's just really despicable and how that's just not something that warrants respect really. And it's ultimately like almost like saying, what, if people don't respect you, why do you keep uncle being like Uncle Ruckus? Like we've seen that episode of the Boondocks where he was like a bus driver and like people are saying like shut up fat boy, whatever, move out of my way fat boy. So it's almost like why do you tolerate that disrespect really? And I want to focus it more on my issue with the 48-hour film project and my film career. So what happened was that I used to do a lot. I was an amateur filmmaker in Connecticut, and there is this competition called the 48-hour film project where you make a film in like 2 days. So what happened was the first year I did the competition, um, there are a few people looking at me and snickering, and they're saying things like, it's great that a black man is doing the competition. And then there was a drunk woman saying something like, why don't you want to work with me? Is that black people want to work with other black people? And she always do things like try to get my attention by punching me in the shoulders and acting like a little socially awkward. So it was almost like that type of thing too, where, I was very naive at the time. Sometimes I didn't look people in the eye really. So people maybe thought that I was autistic. So it kind of goes into that thing too of what happens, unfortunately, that there may be people with mental health issues who are um, of people of color and people and white people or people of other races maybe like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna treat you differently because of the color of your skin, really. And I also remember like working hard at that competition. I made a short film, wasn't that great. It was nominated for a Child Actress Award. They read off the nominations and they said, the person running the event said whatever film Byron created, and then they gave the child actress an award, really, of somebody else's team, really. The child actress only said one line, didn't even look at the camera. They gave it like to a crappy piece of work, really. So what happened was that the mother of the winner, she actually just talked to me and said, hey, you know what, I don't get why you didn't win, really, why your team didn't win. My daughter just only said one line. And then what happened was I just mouthed off and said, it's just ridiculous, it's unfair competition. And I remember the event runner just like, glaring her eyeballs at me. And I just didn't realize that it was kind of like a trap, really, where it was almost like, okay, we want you to get instigated. And I remember, like, as Dave Chappelle said in the Chappelle Show, that sometimes what happens to a lot of black people is that when they're in situations around a lot of white people, sometimes they want you to look like a nigger or a nigga or a thug, really. And the best way to do that is to get under your skin, really. Your disrespect is what people keep the eyes on, but the disrespect that white people give you don't is overlooked, really. So playing my emotions against me. So I talked to the president of the competition. He never responded back. I participated in the competition a little bit more. Participated over 16 times in a year, and I wasn't that successful with winning awards, really. So the following year, I went back to the New Haven competition, and there were a couple of things that happened, really. That I think the first thing was I kind of felt in a way that I wanted to win some awards because I believed in my potential. I also had this mentality of I wanted to win like awards outside of person of color filmmaker or black filmmaker because they've had awards like that at some of these 4-hour film projects, like the Black Filmmaker of the Year, um, the African American of the Year, and then also just like person of color, really. Like I want to be like, I want to prove that I can earn a white man's award. And usually they say like in Hollywood the white man's award is best director of the Academy Awards because they never had a person of color ever hold it. So that's kind of one of these things that I think that sometimes with a lot of people who suck up to white people, they have a sense of proving people wrong, really, like saying, hey, I can play in your system. So it's that naivety of thinking that, hey, you can actually win something. I also think that another part of it is being like, okay, you know what? I want you to know that I'm a big deal. I want you to know that I have a lot of potential, really. So sometimes, what a lot of people do when they suck up to white people is they're like, hey, you know what? respect me because if you believe in me, I can take things really far. Really, look at Michael Jackson and how, um, he had a lot of record contracts from white people as well. Really, in addition to Motown, so he could become that big star. Really, so it's ultimately like saying, you know what, I'm more invested in you because I believe you're going to take me further, or I'm invested in you because I think that I'm better than everybody else. And then there's also that thing too with some black people is that they have a superiority complex. They're like, okay, you know what? I went to college. I have 2 college degrees. I wrote books. I'm very educated. I'm very cultured. I can quote lines from The Wasteland, and I know a lot about Japanese anime, art history, all these things. So sometimes what happens is that you meet an uppity Negro, so they want to suck up to white people to be like, hey, look, I'm doing all these really great things. I'm really, really just I'm really just an impressive person, really. Got to plug this in. Got to plug in my charger. But that happens to a lot of like like the kissing up black people is that they almost make me feel like, you know what, okay, I don't want to work with my own kind, or I don't want to work with other black people because I want to feel like, I feel like I stand out a lot more by impressing white people, really. And then there also comes into that racial superiority where some uppity black people may look at a lot of black people as the thugs and the gangsters and the hood niggas, and that's not all black people. So sometimes people like suck up to white people because they're like, oh well, all of them are kind of perfect, or they'll get me further because they're in a lot of industries usually white is right, really. So I remember like going the following year and having a lot of those thoughts in my head, like I've done this competition over 16 times. I participated in international ones. I've grown a lot as a writer and other things like that. And I remember like the state producer just disrespecting me, getting under my skin really, and also making me feel really really guilty about what happened the following year when I mouthed off to her. Then I reported her to the president of the competition really. And then this is kind of like another thing that happens to a lot of like kiss up black people is that sometimes when you are disrespected and you stand up for yourself, many people who are white don't want to hear it. They want to hear, how you are wrong, really. Or they may just be like, okay, I'm going to treat you poorly, or I'm going to be vindictive, really. How dare you get out of place with me? How dare you use that tone with me? So I remember like when I did the competition, I was instigated, accused of cheating, and other things like that. And also, there were just double standards. Like I asked a question about special effects, and they said something like, "Oh, well, you must be cheating since you're asking me a question about special effects." Mind you, the year before, somebody in that competition, in the New Haven competition, they confessed to cheating. They were allowed to keep their award, and they were white guys. I remember also the year before, there's one team with over 20 people nominated for a Women in Film Award. So imagine this, like 20 people, 20 women are nominated for one award. Really, what does that say, really? So yeah, I did the competition, and I told the audience that I struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression. Really, I'm trying to use all those emotions to influence my writing. And I remember, like, again, lost control of my emotions because I was going through a hard time. The event runner was snickering, making sarcastic, gasping sounds, playing on their phone, and disrespecting me. And they really looked at me like maybe I'm special needs or I'm retarded because I shared too much about myself. So this is also kind of like a little bit of what happens with kiss ass black people, or when you suck up to white people, is that ultimately they know that you are trying to make an impression, or you're trying to say, you know what, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this competition, or recognize me because I'm putting my heart and soul. I'm telling you that all this trauma, all this hurt, all this pain is influencing my writing and my work, and I've done 20 of these films in a year, and working 20 weekends where you're up like almost like 24 hours more, and it's hurting your health, really. Like I was trying to say, like, look at everything I'm doing, look at like this planet, look at this planet of hard work I've done, and also look at the fact that I've dealt with PTSD. I've dealt with so many things to overcome. Really, acknowledge me, really. and then they don't do that really. And I remember like when I was like saying I struggle with these suicidal thoughts, these depression, these are the emotions, the pain, the trauma, all these things that I'm holding on to influence my writing. I want you to take me seriously. I want you to accept me. I remember like somebody shouting me to shut up, and the guy was snickering and grinning like, and he was doing this after he did that, just to instigate me, and other things like that. And it gave me depression. I thought suicidal thoughts for over 10 years, really. And I also remember, again, the following year, I worked with this filmmaker in New Haven, who was really disrespectful to me, manipulated me and saying things. Do you want to make shitty fucking films? You want to actually work with me and become a real filmmaker? Stole some ideas, participated in the 40-hour film project. Then the city producer was like, and then this guy, when he was on stage, he was always looking at me like, just really trying to get under my skin. And I was really proud of myself because what happened was they actually asked me I wanted to join a team really. And like that following year when all that stuff happened with the new guy and then the city producer instigating me one more time really, I worked on a team with a bunch of black guys, and it was one of those things that I felt really insecure about it because, there were people saying that, hey, you should work with this team. And surprise, surprise, blacks work with blacks. And that's what a lot of people do is all the blacks got to work with other blacks. That's how it works in filmmaking. Unfortunately, people should be able to work what they want to, but a lot of people do that as well, put the blacks all together, really. So, it was also another thing that happened with me as well, really, which was like, I wanted just maybe one more shot at proving myself. And I remember like, reading, hundreds of books in a year. I read a lot of Elmore Leonard and Charles Bukowski. Like, I have a lot of books on my shelf, really. And I learned a lot about film editing just by reading books. Like, I studied like the syntax of a lot of these novels. Mr. Paradise. I studied the syntax of a lot of these books, really. Like, this is 400. This book is actually like close to 400 pages, but I remember reading this in like 2 days because the writing was so well done. But I remember like how I would read the syntax and I'll learn how to edit and stuff like that. And I actually want to tell the audience, I want to get down on and be interviewed with everybody else and be like, hey, my films, like I'm editing on my friend's project, and my editing's inspired by how I was reading like 400-page books, and I would write down the paragraphs and analyze the syntax and say, hey, I can kind of figure out an interesting way to edit movies by looking at the structure of how books are written, because, when you read a lot of literature, you see like there's a pattern of how writers write or how writers introduce information and how they introduce characters, sequences, and interesting things, stuff like that. That would have been like really renowned, really. But I remember that I felt so bad about the year before where I had the outburst and shared my suicidal thoughts and said, hey, when this hurt and pain influenced my writing. So I remember that was the year before, and then this year where I was gonna like talk about like how I read books, studied the syntax, and it influenced my editing style. I chose not to speak on stage for two reasons. I felt the first reason was because I felt uncomfortable going down and being with my team because they're all black people. So I was afraid of everybody saying like, hey, look at all the black guys together. Look at all the black guys. Look at all the black guys. This is the black team. Look at all the brothers. Look at the niggas. Look at the gangsters. But that was also just stuff that was in my head because I was so insecure about it. The next thing that happened, and I'll say this, was also because I felt so bad about what I did the prior year when I blew up on stage. And I kind of was saying to myself, I want to punish myself by not going down there, like, to atone for what I did. And then I got instigated by my friend who stole my ideas and made a film, and he was nominated for Best Picture. And he was kind of like, posing for the cameras. And the city producer, who was one of his friends, was kind of like snickering and laughing at me just to kind of instigate me. And I also remember how when I realized all that, it was just like Taxi Driver in my head. Like, it was like saying, like, thank God I'm not down there, because I would have gone into a blind rage and done something that I would regret, really. And I grew up around a lot of domestic violence and just making things really, really ugly. So thank God I didn't do that. But I also remember that I struggled for many, many years with the 48-hour film project. And part of me wanted to go back. I had depression. I had PTSD from the bullying and bad experiences and sharing my suicidal thoughts and depression and saying that influenced my writing and being mocked and other things like that. And then it kind of led me to like what I'm talking about today, really, about ultimately, why do I keep going back? Why do I have this image of me coming back and making great films? Why do I have this image of saying, hey, you know what? They have the New York City competition. I want to bring my drone to New York City. I want to rent out helicopters and then just, film with like, great cameras with stabilization, like capture really cinematic footage from helicopters to make trailers for the organization. Why do I always update them about my travels and my plans and how this thing accomplished me? And I think deep down, it comes to my, wanting to be recognized by white people. And I think that part of it is feeling like, once you won some awards that white people usually get, you officially made it. I also feel that there's also a sense of looking down at black film festivals or black filmmakers and having stereotypes like, oh, well, all black filmmakers love Spike Lee films, which, in my opinion, are not that well made, or all black people love Tyler Perry stuff, or even like the House of Pain with CJ and other people like that. Like that shows us a bunch of stereotypes. Like CJ's as a black guy who just brawls with people. There's a lot of fights and threatening of abuse and stuff like that. So that has a stereotype. So I think that one thing we always have to understand is that when we cannot feel insecure, we always have to feel comfortable around all types of people. And if you are mixed race or black and you feel uncomfortable around black people, you have to psychoanalyze. And it's because I dealt with a lot of racism around white people. Like I always feel like, as I said, if I had a bunch of black friends and we all sat at a table, I'd feel uncomfortable because I'd be like, what do these white people think? They think that I'm black when I'm actually mixed, or they're judging us, or they may think that we're the black team if we're all filmmaking together, and that's something that I should never ever have, really. I would go through electric shock therapy to get rid of that. I work like a lot of the people I work with are African American, really, so we all have to take a picture together. I would not have that feeling of I'm so insecure. I would not have that feeling of I'm so insecure, really. So I always feel like you know that's all that stuff is important, really. You should not feel so insecure. And then also too that it's true, if people don't respect you and they run their own film festivals or they run their own competitions, really, why why do I feel the need for myself to kind of like win their title or be their champion or be like, you were wrong about me, you know in their own competition? I think part of it is naivety, because the thing is that sometimes we have this, we see a lot of movies, and sometimes in movies that does happen where there's this person who is out of place, really, and they go from the shit to the king, really, like Naruto. He was out of place. He had the spirit of the nine-tailed fox role, but in his own community he became a great warrior. But that doesn't happen in some organizations, like, or some film festivals, where what, people don't get you right, and then you're going to be their champion one day. So sometimes we have to just let some dreams die, really. We have to say, okay, and we also have to say too, if that's how they treated me, why should I just continue to invest in these people? Like, as I said before, I share the struggle with suicidal thoughts, mocked for it. I received racist comments, and nobody in the organization has ever addressed that. And they really only focused on me with my negative criticisms of her in the competition, and saying, "Oh well, the 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 conclusion, the psychoanalysis of me is that I'm a sore loser and I want to win awards." Why would I? Why am I stupid enough to be like, hey, I want to come back. I want to learn artificial intelligence. I want to be this great, like, I want to be like their Greek god. Or I want to be like their John Cena. And part of it comes down to that sad thing of what I struggle with personally is just wanting white approval, or maybe like, I grew up with a lot of emotional abuse and racism, people calling me racial slurs, and people emotionally abusing me or thinking I'm mentally ill and I'm stupid. So maybe part of me feels like, I need to kind of just show what I can do, really. And also part of me feels like sometimes like people just hurt my feelings so I don't give my best, really, get in my head, really. And there's a lot of that. And I think that part of me feels like, what, okay, if you gave me that chance, or if I found a way to nurture myself, really, I can show what I can do, really. Like, oh, you don't know the best of me, and I can show you the best of me, you know. But that's kind of like, the thing about life is, you don't show off to anybody. Nobody gives a shit about, if you're always seeking others' approvals, you're never going to be happy for two reasons. Because most of the time, people don't care about, well, how you've struggled, really. Like, honestly, too, I can write a massively powerful story about perseverance with what I've endured. The fact that I worked at a job, I got robbed. That was robbed by its own security guards, struggled with suicidal thoughts. I did a film festival where I shared that struggle with suicidal thoughts. I was mocked, I was laughed at. I was treated like a stupid, retarded special needs person. And then I could say that's why I got into AI filmmaking and write a memoir about why AI filmmaking is a good thing, because we don't get to work around hurtful people, and it gives voice to the voice, gives voices to the voicelesses. That could be a powerful memoir, but ultimately, like I've said, if that's something I want to do, that's something I want to do, really. But ultimately, going to a film festival and expecting people to respect you and to be like, wow, you've committed a lot because you did the competition over 20 times, you had heart issues, um, you spent a lot of money on this, and you were saying that, you struggle with suicidal thoughts and depression, PTSD, and to get mocked, you know, there's a lot of people who don't give a shit about that story. A lot of people don't give a shit about how I was treated, how I was treated in that competition, really, and what happened to me. So it's ultimately like what I've said before, and I'll say it again, that this is one of the reasons why, don't seek white approval, really, because, as I said, you can be that black guy who, how should I kind of say this, that, you work like 10 times harder than white people. You can be that black guy who, like, you've read like hundreds of books. You can be that black guy who, commits a lot. Like, say, hey, you know what, while people do one or two, I do like 20, You can always do those things, and then you can end up sad and disappointed, really, you know, um, sometimes people don't give a shit. And then, as I said, sometimes it's the color of the skin that matters. And sometimes it's ultimately, like I've said, that sometimes, there are things like in filmmaking where there's a lot of racism. And it's like what I said, you take a person who's college educated, has 2 degrees, overcame PTSD, and you want him to look like a violent, angry black man because of existing stereotypes. And as I've said, about what happened with the New Haven City producer, there was a controversy where they were on the news for like issues they did at City Hall, where they did discrimination. They talked badly about people. They treated people poorly. They were taking bribes. They were taking like money. They were extorting money from illegal immigrants. And there was really a lot of discrimination, really. And then the president of the 40 Hour Film Project, a couple months later, gives them a Lifetime Achievement Award after they stepped down. So it's ultimately, like, as I said before, and I'll say it again, if all that stuff happens in an organization and there's always like red flags that there is some racism or there's some certain ways that black people are treated, part of that black fatigue is saying, like, stop kissing up to white people, or also, like, if people don't respect you, there is something that you have to psychoanalyze about yourself to not play that role, really. Because, like I said, look at Uncle Ruckus. When he was the bus driver, people were disrespecting him. When he dies, really, no white person's going to leave flowers on his grave, really. Ed Wuncler in the Boondocks doesn't care this guy was a security guard or whatever, really. So, if and it's understandable. I grew up with a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of discrimination, a lot of people taking advantage of me, emotional, sexual, physical abuse in some areas. So it's understandable why I didn't have a high self-esteem. But I encourage others to have a good self-esteem. And also, like I said, I have had a bunch of bad experiences where I was bullied, almost murdered, traumatic experiences around African Americans, But I've met many mean white people who've been really mean to me and almost killed me as well, really. So just because you also have bad experiences around a certain race of people doesn't mean you're so anti. And part of that is, let's say somebody grew up in the hood and they're always beaten up and robbed by other black people. They shouldn't grow up to be like, I'm going to be the biggest house nigger that I can be, really, because they've had so many bad experiences around African Americans. You go to where you are respected. You go to where you are wanted. And ultimately, you don't try to work things out. You don't try to build relationships with people who have no respect for you in the first place. it's okay to advocate and speak up and say, hey, that was wrong, and it was wrong how that was dealt with. It was wrong how there's no consequences, and it was wrong how some people are being celebrated for being horrible people. Like like that, like some of the people I've dealt with in the 48 or local Connecticut filmmakers. But like I said, if you seek white approval and if you're always kissing up to white people and you're always trying to be the house Negro kissing up to white people, you are always going to be hurt by others. And then ultimately, as I said, they go on with their lives. They don't give a shit about you. They may just like be like, okay, you know what? I'm cool with everybody. Once I see you, I'm just gonna have disgust and passive aggressiveness, just like what happened with me. So, you know, you really have to realize, some people just only see for the color of your skin, and they just want to play mental gymnastics with you because that gives them a sense of power to go through life hurting others and not thinking because they just have power and control issues. So just if you're gonna be a house Negro and you're gonna kiss up to white people, you're playing their games, and usually those are games that you're always gonna lose.